My name is Negele Hospedales, and I am a brand and content strategist originally from Victoria, BC. For 5 or 6 years, I worked directly with artists like Corday, Grace Weber, Chance the Rapper, working on helping them connect more with audiences, create more brand opportunities, partnership opportunities, and all those types of things. Now I work with an agency that works with major brands such as Nike, Jordan, and Lacoste, and we help them connect with audiences through various means of entertainment, whether that be sports, music, or entertainment. What is your brand and why is it important? Every way your audience interacts with you is part of how your brand and how your perception of your art is formed. This perception can be formed in many different ways. There's things like industry perception, so that might be press, playlists, if you're signed, other artists that you're affiliated with, or there's stuff like fan perception, and this might be your following, your audience, popular pieces that you have, things that you're doing on social media. So there's many different ways that a perception is formed in this industry. So some of the examples of things that make up your brand might be visual stuff such as colors, your styling, that type of thing. There also is things like the mediums that you use, platforms that you frequent, how frequent you release music, what type of music you make, and how accessible you are. So a good example of this is someone like Frank Ocean, who is very inaccessible in many ways, and that's part of his brand, is that he pops up when he pops up and he doesn't when he doesn't. Branding is all about making sure that everything you're putting out is communicating the same thing. Navigating this industry is no longer just about music. I often say that half of the battle is just getting people to care and stick around. In today's industry, it looks more like 40% about how talented you are and what your music sounds like, and 60% about actually getting people to care and stick around. Branding is about understanding the principles and not chasing trends. Trends change weekly, but if you can wrap your head around a couple key principles about personal branding, you'll be able to apply what you know to anything, whether that's visuals, socials, partnerships. 3 of the most important principles to wrap your head around is the difference between delayed gratification and instant gratification, building strong brand pillars, and setting strong goals. The difference between delayed gratification and instant gratification is the idea of getting people to recognize who you are and then again, getting them to stick around. It's one thing to be able to get people to navigate to your profiles, maybe even click follow, but it's a real another thing to get them to really care about what it is that you're putting out, stick along for that album that's coming out or whatever it may be. So it's really important to understand what the content that you're putting out is doing and what the main goal of it is. When we're talking about brand pillars, we're talking about being able to create content and expand your brand past just making music. Oftentimes, when I'm talking with developing artists, they say, I'm having trouble creating content when I'm not releasing singles or music. What this can come down to is just simply having a diverse brand that goes past just making music. The analogy that I usually use about why brand pillars are so important is like a TV show and the main character. When a TV show starts, the main character is always a flat character. They have very few traits because you want it to be simple to understand to an audience who's just coming in contact with this character. So it might be the funny person, it might be the happy person, it might be the smart person. Over time, how we come to fall in love with these characters, how we come to hate certain characters is because they become dynamic. That means we've added traits over time and we start realizing that that smart person actually has a little bit of an evil side to them, or that happy person actually, has a little bit of sadness in them. When we think about an artist brand, we want to think about this in the same way, wherein what you're putting out shouldn't just be this one-sided thing. We want it to be something that an audience can connect with you on and build a little bit closer of a relationship with you. While being a music maker will always be the umbrella part of your brand, choosing your brand pillars should always be based on a few diverse things. You should always have one specific part of music making that is part of your brand tool. So that might be production, songwriting, sampling, live instrumentation, etc. But then you should be able to choose a few other brand pillars that are a little bit more based on whether it's your interests, whether it's based on your location, things that you do. So a good example of some of these things may be gaming, sports, cooking, etc. Just something that gives a more rounded idea of who you are and what your message is. So if I'm a new audience member coming to your page or learning about your music, not only am I able to connect with you based on my love for your sound, but also through the things that you stand for. When setting strong goals, it's important to decide what you want to be great at. In my personal opinion, I would much rather be great at 2 to 3 things than mediocre at 50 things. And keeping in mind in this industry, there's always 50 things to do. So especially when you have a small team, it's really important to key in on those few things that 6 months after release, you want to be able to say, okay, I really did well at this and I accomplished it, but then also approach these things from 50 different angles if you have to do it to make sure that you're doing it at the highest level. The other half of this goal setting is keeping track of everything. Sometimes keeping track of these metrics aren't going to be just as simple as interactions, engagements, and impressions. Sometimes it's going to be stuff like how many writers did I message this week to try to get my song placed, or how many show bookers did I interact with over the summer, and I'm keeping track of that weekly. Staying really focused on keeping track of metrics is a really important thing, especially from a developmental artist's standpoint. You really want to key in on the things that you're doing well so that when you do see the success, you're able to correlate it with the things that you've been doing. At the same time, there's always going to be best practice stuff, and so you should be keeping a list and making sure that you're doing the right things each and every release and building consistent good habits. This might be stuff like creating a press release for every single release, having updated headshots, having a brand package, having a one sheet, other things like this. The next thing that I want to touch on is the idea of understanding the sequences of spending. And so when I'm talking about spending, I'm not necessarily talking just about money, but anything from time, money, and effort all must be aligned and sequentially sensical. What I mean by that is it doesn't necessarily make sense to spend, whether it's 3/4 of a budget or 3/4 of my time, putting together a music video when within the marketing campaign I don't actually have a plan to spend on it or push it a little bit extra. So when I'm thinking about this, I really want to say, okay, when I look back at my goals, I have 2 to 3 things I really want to do. And so maybe my goals for this release are streaming, maybe it's press, and maybe it's building up an audience on a secondary platform like YouTube or like TikTok even, which might be your main platform. And so when I look at these goals, then I'm going to work backwards and say, okay, where should my time be spent and how am I going to really maximize pushing that thing forward? So if one of those 2 things or one of those 3 things is making a really strong music video and drawing eyes to it, it's not just going to be spending money on a director and having it color corrected nicely. It's going to be thinking about, how do I get press to this video? How can I run ads to this? What type of ad territories am I using? How can I re-engage this in my social media strategy to where I'm not just posting about it one time and then kind of hoping that my audience gets to it? How can I give it life 2 months after its release? It's really thinking about all the different angles and ways that you can push your content. Next, we're going to talk about engaging your audience. It's important to understand the difference between an audience maintenance platform versus the discovery platform or the many other ways that you can meet an audience through social media. If we imagine the social media platforms on some sort of a spectrum, we have audience maintenance platforms on this side that are similar to Instagram, maybe Twitter, YouTube somewhere in the middle. When we think about the far other end of the spectrum, we have platforms like TikTok, which are made for discovery. When we think about these discovery platforms like TikTok, we're thinking about platforms that are really great at building new audience, putting your stuff in front of people, but maybe aren't as good at converting to stuff like streams or selling tickets, etc. But there's an opportunity to convert them to these audience maintenance platforms like Instagram, like Twitter, where the searchability or the discoverability isn't often as great, but it's a really great place to flex those brand pillars, flex other parts of your brand that really pull you in close to an audience and let them know a little bit more about you and build that closer connection. This is really important when we're thinking about the 3 rings or the 3 levels of fandom and how they can be converted from one another. We have your casual audience, which may make up about 40% of your audience. And these are generally people who have engaged with content in some way, shape, or form, or maybe they just account for a number because they've played a YouTube video, they've clicked on your profile, etc. But generally speaking, these are people who aren't that familiar with your brand. They maybe only come across it once or twice. And the second level of fan, the informed fan, these are people who are familiar with your music. When you put something out new, they might go and download it. They'll engage with your content, especially around the music cycle. But they still won't necessarily, maybe travel a city over or go above and beyond. But then we have the super fan. And in music, this is everything. They say about 20% of your audience generates about 70% of an artist's income. A super fan is that type of fan that will tell a friend, will engage with your content, will engage with contests, etc., will travel a city over, they'll buy merch, they'll spend money. And at the end of the day, when we're really trying to get to that next level, this is everything. And when we're thinking about these 3 levels of fan, of course, it affects where we meet them and how we're engaging them. So when we think about the past levels of social media that I mentioned, superfans are really built on those audience maintenance platforms, wherein that first level of fan who are just, you're trying to create that brand recognition with, it's really great to have those discovery platforms. It's also important to understand how this affects partnerships and brand association opportunities. I'll talk a little bit more about this in the next section, but when we're thinking about these partnerships or these associations, it's really key to be engaging those super fans and engaging even those engaged and informed fans who we're trying to convert into super fans. It's important to create patterns and codes with your audience. So this might be through things like color schemes, emojis that you use, trademarks, showing your face on your feed. All these type of things, even posting patterns, really go to create this pattern with your audience that they see you on the feed, they know what to do, they understand that when you post certain things means new music's coming out, or that when you tease stuff with other artists on your stories or whatever it may be, that there might be a cool partnership that they should be looking for coming out. And really building these strong patterns with your audience can mean a whole lot when it comes to these partnerships, etc., because you're able to kind of play into what you've been building. Now, when we're talking about innovative, creative partnerships and opportunities, again, when we're thinking about which part of the audience we're going to be targeting during specific parts of the campaign, we can now key in on the objectives. Based on this objective, we can decide which part of the audience it makes most sense to target. When we think about these 3 levels of audience, there is differences, as we mentioned, whether it be monetary or whether it be how they engage with your content, who is going to respond to this type of stuff, engage, impressions, that type of things. So how we can look at this is if a partnership is maybe based on sales, so of course this might be a show, this might be a product, if we're thinking about, Travis Scott and his multiple collabs with McDonald's or Nike, etc. What they're doing there is they're really keying in on core fans. They're focusing on those brand pillars, and that ensures that these partnerships, sponsorships, etc. feel authentic. They're not the type of partnerships that come across feeling like an artist sold out or whatever it may be. It's really something that feels authentic to those core fans. And as we mentioned, that 20% of the audience, if you can engage them, they're going to spend money. And to partners, this is really huge, especially even if you're a developing artist or an artist who's a little bit smaller, being able to target those few people that can really help make that monetary difference means a lot to these partnerships, whether it's local or whether it's on a bigger scale. Then next, if we're thinking about an objective that's based on engagement, we might be keying in on that middle group of our audience there. Of course, we have our super fans who are going to support kind of everything that we're doing here, but we're really focusing in on that informed fan who's familiar with the brand, who's going to engage with the content, who's excited to see us grow. And again, to the brand that we might be partnering with or to the company or whatever it may be, if they're trying to drive engagements, that might be the reason that they're coming to you. They realize that you have a big section of your audience that will engage with their social media stuff or will show up to an event that's free or whatever it may be. And then when we're thinking about impressions as the main objective, of course we can target that general audience, but still we need to make sure that the partnership feels authentic to not alienate that core audience and still try to leverage them. What this means is that when we utilize our brand pillars to seek out and test our match with our partners and opportunities that may arise, we can really test it and say, does this fit within one of my 3 brand pillars? Will it look strange to my audience if I do this type of thing? And that's something that you've got to decide for yourself as you're approaching these new partners. So a great example of this might be if one of your pillars is gaming, maybe you're looking at Twitch content creators or making music for YouTube videos or other things within the gaming space, and you're able to kind of create a new lane for discovery, but also create a partnership and a bond that feels authentic to your audience. You know, if you're into nature, maybe you're working with health products or focusing on mindfulness, putting out your own meditations and that type of stuff, or maybe focusing on outdoor activities. There's so many opportunities here. With fashion, maybe it's looking at local designers, local shops, vintage, whatever it may be. And again, using that to kind of bolster your brand so you're able to kind of push yourself forward within this space, but also create this new lane for discovery. If I'm a fan of this local shop or this local brand, whoever it may be, it'll be a great opportunity for me to learn about you as an artist, but also a great opportunity for your audience to learn about this new thing that they might actually be building a stronger relationship with you through. Of course, now all of this brand talk culminates into one really important thing, especially for developing artists, which is revenue streams. How can we turn our strong brand into different lines of revenue? We can look at this through a couple different lenses when we're talking brand strategy, but there's so many different options that you can take here. So the first thing that we can talk about here is merch. This can be something like t-shirts and hats, etc., but we can even look at it like something like a poster. A poster is an example of a piece of merch that is low overhead, but also to a super fan or even just an engaged fan. It's something that is really valuable to them, whether it's a poster of their favorite cover art or just a poster of you as an artist or from a tour. It's a really great way that you can generate some revenue, but also a good way to continue pushing your brand further. A great example of this is handwritten lyrics and maybe a photo that you took. You don't have to be a great photographer at all to take a disposable camera photo, but you can turn this into a really cool poster that fans will love to have and they'll value it as you continue to grow as an artist. The next thing that we can sell, again, a pretty obvious one, is your music. Although we live in this streaming era now, there's so many different ways to monetize your actual music outside of that. There's things like Bandcamp where we can sell digital versions or even physical products on there in a bundle format. There's physical mixtapes. There's actually creating stuff like a vinyl or a CD. Even though it is a little bit antiquated in some ways nowadays, these are things, again, to a super fan or to that engaged fan that they'll really value having, whether they pick it up at a show or pick it up from your website. This is a great transition into concerts. Again, one of the best ways to monetize your brand and your music is through doing shows. We don't always have to think about this as some big production that requires me having a show booker and an agent and all these types of stuff. In the past, I've done stuff with artists like Grace Weber, where we brought in 30 of her biggest fans to have a private Zoom show where she can play a few unreleased records for them, they can ask questions, and at the end, we can release something like a concert tee or a tour tee that's personalized to those 30 fans. And this is something that is so easy to pull off, but again, you're just creating these valuable moments for your fans and creating this emotional connection to this era that you're in. Next, we can look at content. Creating ad revenue is obviously one of those ways that a lot of musicians and content creators in general choose to go. So that might be through YouTube or through other platforms. But there's also stuff like partnered content or even Patreon, where content creators, musicians, bands, etc., are able to give their fans a closer look. Another place where your brand can influence your growth is when you're approaching grants and other submissions for funding. Including your marketing plan, brand kit, one sheet, and other things like that when submitting are really important. Similar to with partners, sponsors, brands, when you're approaching funding bodies, they really want to see that you have this plan for how you're going to approach your audience once you get this project funded and what you plan to do with it. Making sure that you're highlighting your brand pillars and how this project that you're trying to get fund fits into that, but also the goals that you've set that you plan to key in on also affect how you're going to do on these submission forms. So again, we're really wanting to think back to that marketing and brand kit. Finally, consider the other brands that your brand engages with or the things that are associated with what you do. How do they reflect on your brand? Are you creating new opportunities for discovery with similar audiences? And alternatively, how can pairing your brand be helpful to somebody else's? This is important to consider when you're thinking about related artists, so that might be locally within your genre or even the features, your crew, so the people that frequent around you, or even the service providers that you work with, strategists, visual creatives, stylists, and business managers. Oftentimes, it can be hard to know where to find these type of people or where to engage them. The piece of advice I often give developing artists who are coming up and trying to build out their circle is to think of it as the same way a lot of producers know each other or many songwriters know each other, is thinking about it the same way for other creative industries. If you know one strategist, you might know them all. If you know one photographer, you might know them all. So really being able to tap in or just reach out to the closest person to you will really help you be able to engage the environment that you're in or the city that you're in, whatever it may be. And while it's important to think locally, another thing that can be helpful is to use the tools that are available to you, like the internet. For me personally, I was an internet kid who was building these connections online, meeting like-minded people, and using this as a way to kind of push my brand further, to connect to the people that I needed to connect to. One thing I often tell developing artists when they're approaching the idea of brand association through other artists, crews, service providers, etc. It's the idea that it's not always about shaking 1,000 hands, it's about building those 20 or 30 strong connections. In this industry especially, that'll go a long way. These are the people who are gonna vouch for you, help you get those opportunities, connect you to the people that you really wanna be connected to. So don't always focus on the people that you don't know yet, but look within the people around you, and oftentimes you're already connected in the way that you wanna be. And to recap this talk on leveraging your artist brand to find and build your audience, the first things first, your music is the what and your brand is the how. Branding is all about staying disciplined to the principles and not chasing trends. You also want to make sure that you're setting strong goals and considering the sequence of spending and how that relates to these goals that you've set. Remember that your audience can be broken down into 3 rings, and consider who you are targeting and apply this to partnerships and opportunities. Remember, there are many ways to monetize your brand, whether that be music, merch, or even grants. Finally, consider the semantic associations between your brand and others. I'm Negele Hospedales, and thank you for attending my Jumpstart Foundations masterclass.